All right, hello everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Hi, welcome. My name is Sarah Lowe. I am the director of the School of Design, and I'm honored to introduce you to our speaker this evening, Tim Arment. We're here to see the result of Tim's time as the inaugural Digital Futures Fellow here at the College of Architecture and Design. But I have to share a bit of context about Tim that some of you may not know. Tim has been a member of the School of Design since it started. Back in 2019, it was me, Carrie Staples, Chris Coate, and Tim Arment. So he has put in his time here in getting this school off the ground. And if you'll indulge me for a bit, there's a few things I want to point out, because it seems like there's a lot of scenarios where there was a before Tim and after Tim. So before Tim, graphic design, the program, we had a long-standing intro course called The Idea of Design. It was quietly succeeding within the school, but Tim took it over and turned it into an async online course that regularly draws up to 200 students each semester from across the university. We've had graphic design students call it must-see TV, where their roommates, who are not in the class, sit around with them and watch some of his lectures. And I can tell you, I'm the person who teaches the async online class that the students in our minor take after his, and he is a very hard act to follow. So another time before Tim, the college had a room of photo equipment, some order to it maybe, but mostly not. And so after Tim, most of you have experienced an organized system for safely securing, cataloging, and checking out equipment, and a photo room that on its best day can accommodate several studios of students documenting their work. And lastly, before Tim, there was no dedicated space or infrastructure for 3D or 4D technologies for any of us here in the college. And after Tim, we have the Digital Futures Lab. It's a well-oiled space that offers workshops and opportunities in Unity, Unreal Engine, Blender, augmented reality, green screen recording, and motion capture, and it serves students and faculty from across all 4 schools. So with the support from the Dean's Office, Tim conceptualized, he built, he maintains, and he runs that space. So anybody who's had the opportunity to use that space or interact with that, anything that's in there, and now there's 2 student workers who assist, it's all Tim. Tonight, we're going to hear from Tim about the work he's done over the course of his time as our Digital Futures Fellow, a position that he's held since 2023. So let me talk about his work a little bit here. So in the greater continuum of his practice, Tim has used technology to map out the boundaries of perception and the influence of perception on qualia, which is kind of that subjective feeling, like why does fatigue feel heavy? It's the felt qualities of the conscious experience. His earlier work on simulation, rendering software, and game design engines provide the backdrop for his current focus. It's a role that interaction plays in shaping reality. So, let me describe the lecture tonight. In his own words, he says, "We are all authors of artificial intelligence. We contributed, often unknowingly, our ideas, opinions, knowledge, and experience with every post and interaction we shared with our networks. We collectively taught AI how to see, hear, and speak. In spite of this multitude of input, AI remains an opaque black box, and the questions of consciousness and sentience remain looming. Through games, books, and code, this lecture and accompanying body of work explores the absurdity of reverse engineering the human mind, how collaborative input can create singular output, how contemporary online technology melds the minds of its users, and the nature of being that results from this amalgamation." So I am pleased to introduce to you Tim Arment.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. I don't know if Sarah remembers this, but when she first hired me, I think she asked me something along the lines of what I wanted to get out of this job. And my answer was something along the lines of it would be nice to have a job for 5 years. And it's now been 7 years. So, all right. All right. Vroken Figur. I don't know if you're trying to pronounce this in your head, but that's how that's pronounced. So this is a genre of painting, and you may have never heard this term before. If you've never heard of this, you've definitely seen examples of this genre of painting. The most famous example is probably Caspar David Friedrich's Wander Above the Sea Fog. So the term Rückenfigur means back figure or back-facing figure. So called because of the figure turning his back to the viewer, usually overlooking some kind of vista. So this is an example of German Romanticism, pretty exciting stuff. So through the figure, I think the idea is that the viewer is kind of like invited in vicariously to contemplate the natural world, the path ahead, or like the mystery of the unknown. So I've always been drawn to this kind of composition, but it can get pretty cheesy. Here are some examples. I made these when I was a teenager in the software that you now know as Affinity. At the time, I think this was still just Serif Draw Plus, and they gave it away for free. So this is not 3D software. So this is some of my very early work as an angsty teenager. And in my early work, and kind of through a lot of my printed work sort of early on in using this technology, I tended to kind of utilize the figure as sort of a compositional element. And when I showed people this work, not always, but very often, it would inevitably sort of prompt the same question. Is that supposed to be you? And the answer is no. Technically, I was often using the figure to create a sense of narrative and to like put the space into scale so the viewer can kind of position themselves within it. So actually, if it is anyone, I think it's supposed to be you. A way into accessing a virtual, non-tangible space that would otherwise only exist in the mind. But a more interesting question is this Caspar David Friedrich? And the answer is yes, probably. Most people think that this is a self-portrait. Caspar David Friedrich was a redhead. This is a redhead. That's mostly what it's kind of based off of. But in some ways, like, it is both the artist and a point of relation for the audience in accessing this world that the artist is creating or representing. So if you're looking at a painting of a landscape, you're a person looking at a painting. But if you see the figure in the painting, you can kind of be transported into the experience. I think that's kind of the idea. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is me to some degree. Or at least it is both me and everyone or anyone. So today I'm going to talk about an ongoing body of work called Someone Who Isn't Me, or S.W.I.M for short. I'm going to talk about my philosophy of art as simulation of internal states and internal spaces, how I use digital art forms, including video games, in this body of work, and why I hate AI. Okay. Art is simulation. So I found 3D rendering software and digital art as a consequence of wanting to be a game designer. I tried to learn code. At the time, I felt pretty strongly that it did not click in my brain. So I learned 3D modeling, basically to make it look like I knew how to make video games. I found that I had these virtual worlds in my mind, like we all have in some form, in the form of like imagination or dreams and memories. And this digital virtual space can become both a sandbox to dig into and explore these worlds, and a mechanism for visualizing these otherwise internal spaces externally. So I majored in printmaking as an undergraduate, which is an art form that allowed me to kind of expose the digital virtual space to the chaos of physical reality. In digital space, everything is clean because it lacks the history of real space, the sort of buildup, the scars, damage, and repairs that constitute the inherent memory that gets baked into a real place over time. Digital spaces don't really have time wearing on them, so they always appear new. And printmaking creates kind of a history for these otherwise potentially kind of sterile spaces. So these are CMYK prints. This is a mostly commercial printing process because it is kind of like an efficient way of printing full color artwork and photographic images. So with just 4 colors, we can simulate the full, with just 4 colors, we can simulate the full spectrum when viewed at kind of like a moderate distance. So it looks like a picture, but it's actually just a bunch of little dots. So in this work, the ink is simulating what was on the computer screen, which was itself a simulation of what I would consider like a non-digital virtual space. So in graduate school, I was very interested in the virtual space of memory, why some things become kind of like diligently recorded, while other things, seemingly important things, can kind of fade away. So this body of work is called Refrain, and it focuses on trying to resuscitate like deep, old, and generally seemingly insignificant memories that have persisted, albeit likely changing form over time throughout my life. So most things come and go, but these experiences remain a refrain. Each image is a series of loops composited together. So like the trees blowing in the wind is a loop. The cars on the highway is like a different loop. And the full thing runs constantly and is sort of a contradiction. It's both the same and different all the time. So where earlier work explored imagination through virtual worlds, here I'm using virtual worlds to try to sort of rebuild almost completely lost memories. So during this process, the computer became like a part of my mind to some degree. I was using Blender so much, I was dreaming in Blender. I was literally making 3D models like in my sleep. You might relate to this. I hate it when that happens, especially when it's a good model and then you wake up and you're like, now I have to remake that model in real life. I have boring dreams, guys. I have dreams where I'm just like doing my dishes and stuff. And that's also annoying because then you wake up and you're like, no, I have to actually do my dishes. So I was trying to reconstruct what I remembered, and the computer ended up becoming kind of an aid in doing that. So in this body of work, the computer became a part of the process and more than just a tool. I found that it was augmenting how I was remembering and enhancing my ability to remember. And there are no figures in this work because the people that would have been in these spaces were a part of the sort of transientness of the space, whereas the space itself is more fixed and kind of solid in my mind. Even so, this does still beg the question, is this me? Yes. This is me as an environment. I'm a diner in a Kmart or Walmart or something. At least to some degree, I think it is. I've made a lot of work that I think is me in some nebulous sense as a space. So whether that be like a cartoon version of the sprawl that I grew up in, or memories as repeating loops of virtual worlds. So my own mind was the subject of this work because it was the only mind that I had seamless access to. But moving on from this work, I became very interested in the collective mind, the way the experiences of others are shared, collated, and presented by people who are not me. And again, technology provides the means to collect and process this raw material. Okay, it's 2020. I just started working here, second semester, and the world goes online because of COVID. You guys were probably in high school or something, right, mostly. The metaverse is the new hot technology because nobody had seen this image yet. It was coming, though. Everybody's playing video games instead of working from home, except me. I was actually working from home, or living at work, depending on how you look at it. So this is where this body of work started. I wanted to use the collective input of the masses of users on digital platforms as a way of manifesting the internal virtual worlds of others. So I did this by creating these very simple digital brains. So this is not an AI. It's not intelligent. This is a state machine. It constructs words and sentences without knowing what it's saying. It moves fast, but as you can see, still slow enough to where you can watch its like fixed virtual neurons kind of running their processes. The point of this brain is simple. And if you ever like scraped stuff from the internet, it's basically what it does. So it uses the URL formula of a website to scrape random pages, extracting the text string between the body tags and the HTML, and creating new text from this data. And it is not multi-purpose. Each one is built for the specific site that it's scraping from. and it does not have very much or any context really to put the new text together, so the results can be pretty surreal. I was interested specifically in the internal virtual worlds of others, so I focused initially on 2 websites that are based on user-generated content. The first one was Arrowid. Does anyone know what Arrowid is? Arrowid? No one's heard of Arrowid? Okay, well, Arrowid is basically a website for posting experiences doing drugs. And it was a lot of fun to read when I was an undergraduate. So if you ever want to know what taking massive amounts of nutmeg will do to your brain, that's what Arrowid is for, essentially. So the acronym S.W.I.M, or Someone Who Isn't Me, actually originates from Arrowid, I think, or maybe from other like internet forums. It's thought of as a useful term for avoiding self-incrimination when discussing illegal drug use, although I do not think that would hold up in court. So instead of saying, I did drugs, you would say, S.W.I.M did drugs, meaning someone who isn't me. It's genius. But if you read the stories on this website, the term S.W.I.M becomes sort of like a name shared across the multitude of unrelated and disconnected narratives because everyone's using it, so it just keeps coming up over and over again. So the other website that I focused on is a dream journal for similar reasons, and also because it had an easily hackable URL convention that I could exploit. And in both cases, users are voluntarily submitting these like personal, internal experiences which this brain is designed to ingest, combine, and effectively anonymize. These are the anon brains. So what results from these is a sort of information collage. The text is stolen, the sources are laundered, and an apparently new thing is generated. Does that sound familiar at all? So this was around the time that ChatGPT came out, and this work became something of a counterpoint. So ChatGPT does basically the same thing, but at a much larger scale, and critically with a lot more parameters. So many parameters that the mechanism itself is concealed. It is famously kind of a black box. So this work started as a way of automating a process I had used to create books in the past by manually collaging together information. But once AI became mainstream, this became about revealing that sort of underlying mechanism of this brand new AI technology. So what becomes apparent when you view AI at such a low resolution is that the mechanism is not artificially intelligent. It is a mechanism. It is simulating intelligence. If you think about it, there's a massive difference between those concepts. Artificial intelligence knows what it's saying and thinking and why it's saying and thinking it. Our AI is merely predicting what text to use next based on its training data. It does not really know what it is saying, and it will confirm this if you ask. The problem ultimately is that this fixed substrate does not allow for true intelligence, real or artificial, but it can create a convincing simulation of intelligence. Now, in a practical sense, the difference between artificial intelligence and simulated intelligence does not reduce the effect of this technology on society, but it does define the future of its development. Can a truly artificially human-constructed intelligence ever exist with fixed conventional hardware? Or is intelligence, sentience, and consciousness an emergent property arising from neuroplasticity, the ever-changing nature of the biological human mind? Does true artificial intelligence require a synthetic neurology to ever be more than just a simulation using large language models and adversarial game systems to create a convincing facsimile of artificial intelligence? So that's one of the reasons I hate artificial intelligence. It's not really artificial intelligence. This is very effective branding for something it really is not. It's fake, a simulation. And this is not really a hot take. Since the rise of these systems in the 2020s, the early 2020s, many others have pointed this out. Artificial intelligence is essentially just branding. So the question that became integrated into this body of work is, how can AI be used as a tool in making art and developing games as art? How can games, game engines, and game spaces manifest this collectively created simulation of human thought? So I set out to use AI to build an AI, trying to further simulate a game engine, trying to further simulate in a game engine this synthetic neurology. Okay, so the first piece I'm going to talk about is called oceanic feeling. That's a Freudian term, oceanic feeling. From what I understand, this is a feeling of being seamlessly one with the rest of humanity, feeling like an ocean. So this is an NPC. He's doing a little swim appropriately. So in video games, an NPC is a non-player character. These are characters that exist in the world, but are more than just props. They're meant to appear as living things in the world. And this is one of the main uses of AI in video games over the years, and there are some famous examples of this. NPCs in video games like Skyrim, this Skyrim in particular used radiant AI. Far more than just props, these NPCs seem to live out daily lives with routines, homes, workplaces, and they react dynamically to the player. The Nemesis system is a somewhat infamous example of advanced game AI. It was called the Nemesis system because characters would literally, like the NPCs, would literally hold grudges against the player based on what you did in the game. So they would come back to get you, basically. And it's infamous because it was patented, meaning no other games could use it except for the game, the very famous game that everyone still plays, Shadow of Mordor. That's the only game that gets to use this system. In games like Metal Gear Solid 4, NPCs would learn and react to the player's individual playstyle. So if you're good at getting headshots, they would start wearing helmets. I don't know if that violates the patent. I didn't look into it. But these are all still simulations. They exist at a surface level with parameters encoded through playtesting and developing reactive systems in response. But maybe my favorite example of this is also probably the lowest resolution example of this. Johnny Castaway. Johnny Castaway. Does anyone know what this is? Nobody knows what this is? No Johnny Castaway fan, yeah. Johnny Castaway, this is a novelty screensaver from my childhood. Johnny Castaway lived on this little island, and he would go about his day attending to various tasks in an effort to basically escape the island. There was a day and night cycle in this screensaver from like 1993. But there's no real logic. It was just sort of a set of animations that played in like a mostly random order. So this was the inspiration for this project initially. So Oceanic Feeling is a self-playing game or zero-player game. I basically wanted to recreate Johnny Castaway, but with a contemporary game NPC AI. But I'm not a programmer, really. And as long as I'm using AI to produce an AI, I might as well leverage that intrinsic property of this tool that it seems to be an expert in everything. So I built this AI around the neurology of the human brain. This NPC has an amygdala for regulating emotional responses, a hippocampus for remembering things, an occipital lobe for seeing through its eyes. That's how he finds coconuts. He has a motor cortex for handling animation. The hypothalamus regulates needs. And the brain is fundamentally modular. Each behavior is encoded in a schema that uses memory of locations to perform actions. So this system really does directly govern all of the actions of the NPC dynamically, although it still lacks the ability to easily learn or effectively construct its own schemas. That would be the next step. So this NPC should generally find balance with its environment over time, but it can die. It does have like health and other needs that affect its health. So you can interact with this NPC using QR codes that I've placed around the building. Scanning these codes does allow you to control the game. However, in doing so can upset the simulation, potentially killing or severely stressing out the NPC. So if you see him like sprinting around, he's stressed. It's stressed. She's stressed. I don't know. So the only way to save this virtual character really, or at least the best bet for its survival, is just to not play the game. But technically that's true for pretty much all video games, mostly. Yeah. Okay, moving on to the second piece on display here. This project is called Forgetful Caretaker. So this is a kind of simulator game. I do not understand why people like simulator games. If you don't know what I'm talking about, these are simulator games. So if you haven't heard of this genre before, it is essentially just doing a job. You sell stuff to customers, you run the cash register, you clean the business, mop the floors, take out the trash. It's a job. I've had jobs. I don't want my video games to be jobs, but I did play a bunch of simulator games for research for this fellowship, and I didn't enjoy it. It really was for research. So the idea that this is a simulation, or that these are simulations, is something of an inside joke in these games, as they are obviously very abstract sort of cartoons of these actual jobs. You know, time moves at an accelerated rate. Everything is kind of an abstraction. But I do like how these games become a kind of expressive vehicle. You design your business. Everybody ends up with a different instance of the same base parts. Everybody's card shop or water park or whatever looks different eventually, despite being given like the same plot of land to start with. So Forgetful Caretaker is a kind of simulator game. Typically in narrative games, a person playing the game embodies the character, but this is altered sometimes. So when I was a child, my parents were janitors, and we cleaned a church with a youth room that had a Nintendo 64. So that was the first time I ever played like a 3D game. This is in like the late 90s. I'm old. Since none of these consoles were ours, like we didn't own them, my brother and I would play on the saved games of other kids who used the youth room during the day. And we were usually there in like the middle of the night. So we never met each other, but we were sort of picking up where the other players left off, kind of collectively progressing through the game, which in this case literally was Super Mario 64. In grad school, I built a few VR games for galleries, and I always coded in a scene reset. So if the headset was removed, this would sort of reset the game. So it would make sure that everyone has like a standardized experience. So everyone would start in the same starting position. But it occurred to me that it might be interesting to just let the system run kind of continuously so that each person picks up where the last person left off, sort of emulating that experience of progressing alongside strangers who are stepping in and out of the role of the character. So this is a kind of asynchronous multiplayer, a single-player multiplayer game, recreating the experience of inheriting the world and character from others, inhabiting and embodying it temporarily, and then giving it away for someone else to control. So this became the basis for Forgetful Caretaker. So in this game, you play as the caretaker, and your job is to take care of a garden world that generates as you progress. You can choose to take care of the garden however you see fit. You can sterilize it, you can destroy the plant life, or you can clear the weeds and other invasive plants, clean it up, and plant new seeds to grow new life. Either way, the game will allow you to progress, and the world itself becomes a record of the user's actions. The idea of memory encoded in space is very interesting to me, and this space holds a sort of memory of each person who has stepped into the caretaker role. So the world is an expression of some combination of the collective unconscious and myself. The game is procedurally generated as a series of interlocked square cells, each based on an archetype. So each cell has kind of a role that it generates and a series of procedures that it follows to create it. So each playthrough is ultimately unique. Each flower and flower pot is unique. Flowers planted in the game are procedurally generated based on a very large set of parameters that constitute the phenotype of the plant. If you use this shovel tool to dig holes in the various flower pots, You can plant seeds for new flowers, water them, and watch them grow procedurally as digital life forms. So this game is still under development. This is kind of a prototype. Eventually, this will live on as a non-VR online multiplayer game that only allows one person to play at a time. So one server with a maximum player count of one player. And everyone picks up where the last person left off. So the world that results from a playthrough is the collective representation of how each player interpreted their job in the world. So as a human being working on these projects and an artist, this wave of automation has left me searching for a place in my own process. As someone who works with digital forms, I've always argued that digital work represents valid human expression because it's made on a computer, not by a computer. But I think this is becoming increasingly obsolete, or at least it's changing. AI image and 3D model generators are trained on collective human input. To some degree, they're an expression of both the creator, or prompt writer, and the multitude of training data. But if the extent of an artist's influence is writing prompts or selecting ideas from a list, I think that makes me a worse artist, and it feels very unfulfilling. So in this work, I did use agentic coding extensively, and this process for me involved constantly wrestling control away from the system that insists on taking over. Most of the objects you see in Forgetful Caretaker are procedurally generated, meaning they are modeled by code and mathematics, mostly created by AI and shaped and refined by me. So they become a visible manifestation of this collaboration between myself and the anonymous collective. This well in Forgetful Caretaker is from my backyard when I was a child. It's not a real well. It's a simulation of a well. It's a simulation of a simulation of a well. Actually, my dad built it as a flower pot planter, so it was for planting flowers. This repeats in most cell archetypes, even though I did technically build a working procedural well generator. I decided not to use it. This well is one of several non-generated, truly prefabricated fragments of myself that run through this work. In some ways, these are imperfections. They're non-procedurally generated parts of a generated world. But I think these imperfections are an expression of myself and my history in the work. It kind of encodes a history into the space that is built mostly by and for anonymous others. So despite the name of this body of work, this probably is me. The work is me, I guess, to some degree. So the real question is, what is AI? Is it us? An entity that is a collective representation of our thoughts and abilities? We are all the authors of artificial intelligence, even if we didn't realize it. CAPTCHAs were famously used to train image recognition AI. You know, CAPTCHAs, like pick the squares that have the bus in it, that provided crowdsourcing for labeling large volumes of images. Voice assistants were used to train AI. Even Pokemon Go was used to train AI. Apparently for navigating geospatial situations. So every image or written text we posted to the internet was fed into the amalgamation. So I've always been fascinated by virtual spaces and virtual things. I think art has the power to connect the internal virtual experiences that are otherwise inaccessible between people. Technology, likewise, has the power to meld together the collective into individuals or categories. This can be done for advertising purposes, content delivery and distribution, or in the case of AI, the collective intellect disembodied and re-embodied in an abstract entity, ultimately forming something that is not me or us, but indeed some combination of both. The Rookin figure, standing on the threshold of the unknown. Okay, that's all I have. All right, thank you.
So we have some time for question and answer. I'll give you the microphone because it's being recorded.
Hey, thanks, Tim. That was awesome. Love the work, love the games, love the ideas. Very at once conceptually powerful and just fun to look at, fun to be with. So thanks. But I was thinking the whole time I should probably take a skeptical stance in this question I was going to ask you, and even if I don't agree with what I'm about to say. But I was wondering, like, sometimes I have doubts about my own intelligence and my own authenticity, like my non-artificiality, if you will. And part of that, I think, is because, like, I participate with so much data these days that it becomes evident to me that I'm not a unique, special individual, but I'm a part of a larger metadata structure that describes me as much as it describes Everett or whomever else. And we probably desire the same stuff, for similar reasons and whatnot. Anyway, and I don't know, I was thinking about that relative to some of the claims that you were making about the kind of speciality of human intelligence and agency relative to some of the larger models and tools. And if there's any, like, just advice you could give me on that front. And then B, like, do you find hope in there somewhere on the seam between, what's me and what isn't me? Or do you find, like, some kind of cool or valuable slippages sometimes between what is you and not you?
Do I find hope? That's an interesting question. I did say I hate AI. I'll say this: you are not an AI. You're an I, right? An AI is a predictive text system. So you're not trying to predict the next thing to say when you're talking. You're trying to, like, express your thoughts when you're talking. And I think there's something that is unique to the human sort of biological situation about that. Like, something about all these games is it's very difficult to build an AI, like an actual AI, like an actually artificially intelligent system using conventional hardware, using, like, fixed stuff. If you know what RAM is very expensive right now. And one of the reasons for that is because AI uses a lot of RAM. Our brain doesn't have RAM. Our brain doesn't have anything that's even really analogous to RAM. I think the sort of constantly changing nature of the human brain is really what distinguishes the human mind from what we have currently with artificial intelligence. So I think finding a way to work in this sort of environment involves sort of finding those sort of unique things that the human brain can do that this can't do or can't simulate. Yeah. So, I mean, there's hope to some degree, but adaptation is necessary. Yeah.
Hey, Tim. Yeah, really wonderful stuff and super interesting to see sort of the body of your work too. And I guess my question sort of fits within that, whether even the past couple of years, you've seen yourself shifting more towards, I mean, this very sort of like fertile metaphor of gardening, because I think that it was so interesting to see those moments of where you're even sort of tugging at this thread of the AI taking over and almost acting as an invasive species in your process. I wonder if, looking back at your work, you've seen threads of the natural landscape or even those sort of periphery spaces between a suburban sprawl and landscape sprawl, whether these have come to the surface or if this is a fairly new revelation that gardening is this, like, powerful space for you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a relatively new thing. I talked a little bit about ways that the computer has been kind of invasive in the process. I mean, I work with these digital forms, so I guess to some degree it's expected that the computer is going to end up playing a role in sort of shaping the work in the same way that like the kind of paintbrush you use or whatever would go into sort of shaping the work. But gardening in particular is something that I was just interested in this game in particular, because the idea behind the game is that everything is procedurally generated. So that means that there's a procedure, sort of a set of steps, like a genome, that kind of plays out, that results in like a thing. And that thing could be an inanimate thing. Like I did actually build a well generator that you can just push the randomize button. It'll just keep generating more wells. I decided not to use it eventually because I wanted to use my well. But with the plant life in particular, like it becomes sort of like a virtual life form. You know, like you can see it kind of like actually growing procedurally, like in the world, and generating sort of unique versions. So I wanted to create a game where people could leave their mark on the world in some way, and that was the way that I wanted to do it. You know, I wanted it to be like there's sort of I want the player to have some agency in sort of creating the space in the same way that in a simulator game you sort of like build out your water park or whatever. In this game, you sort of build the world based on your own sort of aesthetic preferences and things like that, or you can just ignore that system completely and destroy the world. You know, and either way, it sort of it lets you move through the world, and everything becomes kind of a record of what has happened. You know, in that space. Yeah.
If I'm a user and I want to play the game, so like, could I, if I go seeking the game at a certain time, and someone's already in there, it's kind of a stopping point for me, right? So would it be interesting to have sort of like a list, like where you're like, okay, put me on the wait list, and then the game kind of reaches out to you when it's available to you next, and you have like maybe a few minutes to get in there and do your thing? Or how do you see it working for, like on the user end?
I can just talk loud. Yeah. So the future development of the game is that it's a single player multiplayer game, so only one person can play at a time. So everyone else has to wait in line. That's basically the answer. I haven't thought of building a system to like alert you when it's your time to play. I would sort of resist that because I just like the idea of people waiting in line to play the game. Yeah. Like you have to really commit. You have to want it. Yeah.
If I can piggyback off of that, have you thought about doing an age? I know you said it could die, but eventually, let's say that everyone wants to play it, stay safe. Are they going to naturally expire? Is this forever? Are there life stages, or how do you see that?
You mean for Forgetful Caretaker? For the NPCs, there's no real life stage, but they can die. They don't get old though. That could be a thing. Like I could do that. I could make them get old, but why would I do that to them? I'm getting old. It sucks. Do you guys know the TVs here weigh 65 pounds? I don't know if anyone's bought a TV recently, but they usually weigh like 10 pounds, 5 pounds. These are 65-pound TVs. Anyway, so yeah, there's no life cycle system in that regard. It's just like the NPCs essentially repair themselves. That's all they do. So they go around and repair themselves. And as long as they keep doing that, they'll stay alive. That is actually kind of a profound thing that ChatGPT mentioned while working on this project. It said something like, the NPCs don't have like actual desires like a human has. They are basically just machines that repair themselves, and that kind of hit home a little bit. But in Forgetful Caretaker, yeah, there's no like age or progression system either. It's just kind of like you can play as long as you want, and if you're inactive for too long, it kicks you out. and the character is immortal. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good question. The line is really fuzzy. I think games are supposed to be fun. Would you guys agree with that? Are games fun? Games are supposed to be fun, right? Carrie's shaking her head. Why are you shaking your head? They don't have to be fun. I think fun is overrated. Fun is overrated. If you take anything away from this talk, fun is overrated. Yeah, I mean, I think that I would consider both of these to be games because there's a game system that's happening. So there are like antagonistic forces that are kind of playing off of each other, and both of these do have a mechanism of control with the oceanic feeling with the NPCs. It's designed in a way where multiple people can control the game at one time by scanning QR codes, essentially, to send commands into the game. The game itself, though, is really between the NPC and the natural forces that are trying, essentially, to kill it, for the most part. And if I had a team instead of just an AI helping me to build a game of these two, I would build out Forgetful Caretaker more as like a VR game. But there's like a lot of other projects that I would probably work on first if I had an actual like full team of people to work on. Yeah. Yeah, so I'll try to go in reverse order there. I might ask you to repeat those. But I think everyone should probably be using agentic coding. I would very strongly recommend it. In fact, when people are doing game development stuff and not using agentic coding or vibes coding, I find it very strange. I think you should definitely do it. I think you should definitely use it for that. Even if you're not a programmer, it is like a great way to learn programming, especially if you ask it to teach you. And if you ask it to include a lot of sort of instruction and debug lines and stuff like that, so you can see what all the different parts of the code are doing, and you can get sort of a sense of the structure of the code. So you can use game engines for building anything that's nonlinear or interactive. So my background is probably more in, actually started animation and game design around the same time. But when you think of animation, you have a very linear thing. You have a linear timeline. And using a game engine at sort of a base level, it just creates like a nonlinear piece of work, essentially. So if you look at the work that I have on display, it's a bunch of different animations that are all kind of happening sort of in response to each other and in response to things that are happening in the environment. So it's a nonlinear system, basically. And what was your first question, Faye? Okay, yeah, that's the main thing. But like, it could be anything from just like physically sort of feeling embodied in a space. Game engines can kind of do that, all the way up to building, you know, like games with game mechanics and that sort of thing. So that's what Unity and Unreal Engine do, basically. They create kind of an environment for that. So you create your 3D models and your assets and other software, bring them into the game engine, and that's where you kind of connect them with like interactive systems. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.